webinar series. As all of you know, Villgro is a incubator of social enterprises. This is our 20th year. Every year we do we do the Unconvention, which is a gathering of people, entrepreneurs, and all other members of the social enterprise ecosystem. Typically, our Unconvention, the physical event happens at the end of the year, but this year, of course, situation is very different, and we're doing a bunch of these virtual events which are spread over, which happen every month, and this webinar is part of it. Uh, so today's topic is we are going to talk about. Before that, I should say that the theme of the Unconvention 2020 is remodeling for resilience, right? And today we are examining one aspect of that, and that is whether social entrepreneurs can revitalize rural livelihoods in the post-COVID era. A small background to that is that Villgro, along with our partner CEW, recently launched a program called Powering Livelihoods. The basic premise of Powering Livelihoods that renewable energy coupled with social entrepreneurship can create a lot of jobs in rural areas, right? Of course, this program was conceptualized much before the COVID pandemic hit us, but through the window of Powering Livelihoods, we got a chance to observe our multiple social enterprises working in rural settings, and also got to observe the impacts of the pandemic. So we thought it's really very topical at this point to speak about this subject, which is about rural livelihoods. The primary purpose of this webinar is, I guess, twofold. One is to examine how exactly rural livelihoods have been impacted, through the COVID pandemic. It's been, now a good 6-7 months into the pandemic, and I think a clearer picture is beginning to emerge on how what kind of impact it's having on the rural economy. And secondly, and most importantly, any change, any major external event always, of course, causes disruption, causes a lot of pain and difficulty, but it also sets the stage for a change in the future. It sets the green shoots which emerge, could actually take things in a different direction. So that is one of the things we want to examine here in terms of, when we are kind of reimagining the rural livelihoods, can we look at it from the lens of, social entrepreneurship, and can we look at, whether, it's not just about rural jobs, but about micro entrepreneurs emerging in rural areas. And secondly, whether, energy, especially decentralized energy, can actually be an important catalyst to creating more of these jobs and these rural micro entrepreneurs. And in that way, can the recovery from COVID be a green recovery? These are the two main things we want to examine. I have to say that we have a very distinguished and very capable panel with us today. I'll do a quick introduction of the panel before we plunge into the discussion. We have Samik Sundar Das with us. He's a senior rural development specialist from the World Bank. He's a professional with more than 2 decades of experience, closely observing the rural economy, being part of multiple World Bank programs. And I think he'll bring a wealth of experience and knowledge about rural economy and how it can be revived. We have Madan with us, Madan Padaki. He's an entrepreneur. He calls himself a change maker. He's a co-founder and CEO of OneBridge. He's a co-founder of Game. He's a serial social entrepreneur, basically. And one common theme I've seen in all his endeavors is that he really believes in the concept of creating, while he himself is an entrepreneur, he spawns thousands and thousands of more entrepreneurs in rural areas. So I think he's, in that sense, a visionary of what the rural economy can look like. We have Saskia with us, Saskia Werther. She's a program manager at Doen Foundation. Doen has been really the pillar of support for a number of Indian social enterprises who are working in the space of decentralized renewable energy. They have really played a catalytic role in supporting these enterprises and showing them a way forward. And Saskia personally and Doen Foundation have been very, very passionate about DRE, decentralized renewable energy for livelihoods. And lastly, we have Abhishek Patak, who's the founder at Greenwear. Greenwear actually brings together the two themes I've been talking about. They use renewable energy in all their activities. They are it's a fashion house. They work from yarn to textile. They use renewable energy in every stage of the process, but everything is decentralized. So all the production is done by local, rural micro entrepreneurs. So I think Abhishek also will have a lot of interesting things to say. So without further ado, let's get into the discussion. Maybe I will start with Samik. I'll request him to kind of make the opening remarks. Samik, as a World Bank professional and as a person who has worked in the rural economy for a couple of decades now, what would be your observations about the impact of this pandemic on the rural economy, on rural jobs? Maybe we can start the discussion with that perspective.
Thank you, Ananth, and namaskar to everyone who has joined these discussions. I think due to this pandemic, there has been transformational structural shifts within our society and commune that is happening as we discussed today. The pandemic is tested our perseverance and our ecosystem to the nth. When I say the ecosystem, it also includes the social, economic, and political ecosystem in which we live. And around the world, the pandemic has affected everyone's life in some way or the other. It has spared nothing actually, space in terms of urban, peri-urban, rural, or in terms of sectors, services, manufacturing, or agriculture. Everywhere the pandemic has left its impact in a negative way rather than in a positive way, but it has given us the opportunity to build back better maybe. So with that, I would like to start speaking on a couple of things that I think the pandemic has opened up for us to really debate, discuss, and understand. One is the migrant and the job crisis, which was unsurmountable during the lockdown period, the issue of migrants moving back. And this has disproportionately affected low-paid workers, and most of whom have been laid off. Employers have not been able to continue paying salaries given the widespread disappearance of income and cash flow. So you can see a high level of distress that has happened because of the crisis, particularly to the informal and the migrant workers or around the country. And if you see, a large proportion of the labor force in India are migrant workers, have not only lost their source of income, but they have to go through the agony of traveling back to their homes and are currently today contemplating to rebuild their lives in their home communities where they have gone back to. In May 2000, this year, World Bank, ID Inside, MORD did a survey of 4,500 households. We suggested that there is a significant economic distress among migrants. On average, wages of highest earning migrant in the household fell by 62% since the lockdown was imposed. And the survey also stated that amongst the non-agricultural household, average wages fell by nearly 78% since March, while the number of weekly workdays fell by nearly 74%. So you can imagine the intensity of impact that the pandemic has on particularly on the informal sector and the migrant population in our country. The second aspect that I would like to focus on is on the impact on rural micro enterprises. And most of the rural micro enterprises in this survey reported zero sales or minimum sales during the lockdown and incurred losses to the extent of the fixed costs, which is both interest and rentals. And a significant number of enterprises also incurred losses due to damage, spoilage of raw material, and whatnot. The enterprises that had stocked up, for festives and wedding seasons, with excess working capital being blocked in inventory, sales were slow, and the discretionary spending power of the consumer was also low. So all these juxtaposed into a very complex problem in the rural space that we are seeing today. And on top of that, there is lack of reduced availability of supply of credit, cancellation of orders, what you may have there, all kinds of issues we are seeing in terms of what is happening in the rural space. the overall income and cash flow has dried up significantly, and it is going to have subsequent medium and long-term impact on human capital aspects. There's no doubt this is going to be a long haul. The pandemic has brought for the inherent weaknesses in the economy as well as supply chain and our social fabric. If you see, most of the rural household portfolio had a substantial contribution from remittance, and it will take some time for income to reach pre-COVID levels. There's no doubt it will be a long-term work for people like us who are in this sector, basically. Having said that, we must acknowledge that visible bright spots, specifically the strength and resilience of micro enterprise, to reshape and revive themselves into production systems such as manufacturing masks, proactive gears, protective gears, sanitizers, and hand washes to address the immediate need of frontline workers. They have responded and reacted to the current challenge swiftly, flexibly, on par with successful business anywhere to meet local requirements. However, there is a big gap that we see from the World Bank side in terms of how do you really recapitalize, revive, revitalize the rural space in a way that it can go back to pre-COVID kind of livelihood situation. I will stop here, and Ananth, back to you.
Thank you very much, Samik. That was really, very good summary. I mean, though it's a grim picture, I think a good summary of the situation in the rural economy. I'll pick up on a couple of points, particularly on the micro entrepreneurship aspect. And as you pointed out, there's a lot of resilience, and we have seen several ways in which the micro entrepreneurs have managed to recoup and somehow keep a foothold, keep their concerns going. But I'd like to bring in Madan here. Madan, whenever I speak to you, I feel that you're kind of a visionary who's kind of ahead of your time, right? Because right from many years, you've been speaking about micro-entrepreneurship and creating entrepreneurs in rural areas, not just jobs, but people who in turn can create more jobs, right? And that has been the thrust of a lot of your endeavors, culminating now in the One Bridge. And interestingly, you were telling me sometime back when we were speaking that, in fact, One Bridge is actually seeing benefit from this whole situation because of, the increase of, awareness of even in rural areas of, home deliveries and so on. But I'd like to hear that from your own words, maybe a little bit about your journey as a social entrepreneur who in turn creates micro entrepreneurs in rural areas, and how you've actually seen encouraging signs during this whole, otherwise very disastrous situation. Over to you, Madan.
Thank you, Ananth, and thank you for having me here in this wonderful panel. Lovely to meet with Samik, Saskia, and Abhishek, and look forward to a lot of learning in this session. I've always been fascinated with the potential of young people. My early days when I was running Meritrack, which was an enterprise that I founded, which we sold to Manipal, I had an inside view of the potential of young people, largely looking at employability skills, and we were testing people by the hundreds and thousands every year. Meritrack itself has tested over about 50 million people so far. And I had a black and white view that some people are employable, some are not, till our work at Headed High Foundation changed everything for me when I discovered that you can literally take the most uneducated, illiterate person you can find on the face of this earth, and in a very concerted 1,000-hour program, you can transform that individual completely into a very confident English-speaking, computer-literate professional. And this has happened over and over again over the last 10 years. We have touched over about 15,000 people. So the first learning for me, especially when you look at rural and livelihoods, is that we have to begin with understanding that there is infinite potential in every individual. Right? And how do we bring that self-efficacy and self-confidence to bear in any intervention that we do becomes a critical cog in the wheel. The second learning was that several of these youth that we were transforming came to the cities in search of jobs, and I saw firsthand how they were struggling to make their lives make both ends meet, because at 10,000 rupees a month, you're barely able to survive in a city like Bangalore or Delhi if you don't have a support system. So several of our young people are going back to the villages saying, I can't survive in the city, give me something meaningful to do. And that's how we started setting up a rural BPO and trying to create jobs. But the realization was that a centralized approach to create jobs will not work. In fact, we had to shut down the BPO after a few years because the supply far outstripped the demand. And in my mind, the framing became that, listen, nobody can go in and create jobs. You need to create jobs locally by local entrepreneurs. And that's how OneBridge was formed, saying that what will it take for us to kindle the entrepreneurial spirits? And I would argue that, especially in rural, entrepreneurial resilience is far higher than in the urban settings, because they find they face a lot more adversity as entrepreneurs in the villages than we do in the cities, right? So the second part of it was that how do you really kindle the entrepreneurial spirits? And OneBridge has been an experiment to that end, where can we create an entrepreneur in every village, and can this entrepreneur and their family earn 6,000, 10,000, 15,000 a month, and kind of double their family income? And we've proven that it is possible by bringing technology, by bringing new commerce technology into the villages. We operate in about 6,000 villages, and we've seen tremendous success stories, some lots of failures and lots of lessons. That's still work in progress. But the third realization, Ananth, in that journey came in from the fact that, OneBridge in its wildest dreams maybe will have 100,000, 150,000 entrepreneurs. But the need of the hour in the country today is like 100 million entrepreneurs, right? I mean, we have 150 million youth entering the workforce. The fact that the corporate sector, the formal sector employs less than 10% of that group. So even if 15 million, 20 million of them were to go into the formal sector, what happens to the rest? So the only way that we could frame it was that, hey, from amongst them or from the existing lot, can we create 10 or 15 million new enterprises, which can scale significantly locally? When I say significantly, from one person shop to 10 or 15 people to be employed, can these generate employment? And that's how GAME was formed. Ravi Venkatesan, Mekin, and myself debated on this for a long time and said that this is a problem worth going after. And we call this as mass entrepreneurship, as opposed to either one end of the spectrum, which is tech entrepreneurship, which we all read from the front pages of ET, which is all glamorous, fundraising, unicorn, etc., but they rarely create jobs. On the other hand, you have the MSME definition of necessity entrepreneurs who are too small. The Indian MSME sector has about 68 million enterprises, but about 95% of them are less than 3 people. So which means there's a yawning missing middle of how can you create opportunity-driven entrepreneurs who can seize opportunities, who can go on to create 10, 15 jobs, and can we increase that number is the mission at GAME. And I think that conversation is super critical to the conversation today, that how can we as entrepreneurs or as social entrepreneurs revitalize the entrepreneurial spirits of people for them not only to generate their livelihood. Somehow I kind of dislike the term livelihoods because it's very sustenance based. I think if you can really talk of economic opportunities and how people can exploit the economic opportunities to grow their incomes and everybody else's, I think that's the framing. And at an ecosystem level, which is what we are, our learning has been you have to focus on the seed, soil, and the climate. The seed, of course, is the entrepreneurial mindsets. What can we do as an ecosystem to kind of create role models to spur this entrepreneurial spirits and to instill confidence in people that, hey, if somebody else can do it, so can you, which is the seed. The soil is the local ecosystem that we can create. What kind of support groups can we create? How do we tolerate failures? How does a local bank manager in a small town or a village be entrepreneur friendly? How can a school teacher teach entrepreneurial mindsets to kids in the school? Right? Can the local laundry fellow be the role model there rather than a Mark Zuckerberg? Right? And lastly, at a climate level, what policy environments can we create to make the life of entrepreneurs easier to grow, right? And not throw some 70 rule books at them and say you're in violation of 20 of them at any point of time. How can you really work on the ease of doing business? So I think if you can bring all of this together, and I would argue that the world is not divided into social entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs. I would argue that the world is divided into entrepreneurs and anti-social entrepreneurs. So which means all of us are social entrepreneurs by definition. Because we're trying to solve a problem that will make the world a better place to live in. We can truly revitalize the the livelihoods landscape, so to speak. One last data point I want to lay, and I was having a conversation with the founder and CMD of CMIE this morning, and he made a very interesting observation, which adds to what Samik was saying, where there are job losses, contract, informal, everything. He said in the CMIE surveys, the last 6 to 8 months, they've seen a sharp increase in entrepreneurship and sharp increase in people going back to agriculture, right? Which may not be such a good news because it is disguised unemployment. But I was very heartened to know that people are looking at entrepreneurship, maybe because they have nothing else to do, but can we seize this moment? And instead of framing them as just necessity entrepreneurs, can we truly start unleashing enough opportunities at them and creating this local soil, the ecosystem which can spur people to go that extra mile and create more jobs? I think we are at a cusp of a massive opportunity. And as I think Churchill said, never let a crisis go to waste. COVID has been a crisis. Maybe you should look at the silver linings and figure out, hey, how do we truly make this crisis count for us? So these are some early thoughts, and I'm sure there'll be lots of conversation points that will come up.
Sure. Thanks, Madan. I like the way that you ended on an optimistic note. But I'd like to pick up on one of the points you mentioned, that local entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs operating in rural areas typically face a lot more adversity than those who are operating in cities and so on. And probably in a survey conducted by our partner CEW, as a precursor to the Powering Livelihood program I was talking about, one of the adversities which really popped out was energy, power, right? Anybody who wants to have any kind of a mechanized operation, be it something as simple as a flour mill or even just a computer center, a photocopying center, power becomes a major obstacle for these micro entrepreneurs. And I think that's where I think Doen and Saskia, who represents Doen Foundation, has really played a visionary role. And I see a significant kind of change in strategy in focusing now more and more towards the energy as a catalyst for improving rural jobs and rural the productivity of rural entrepreneurs. So Saskia, maybe I'll request you to speak a little bit about how you personally and Doen Foundation views the space of the productive use of energy. And it's not just India that you operate in. I mean, your foundation works across India, Asia, and Africa. So maybe some of your learning, some of your observations, and why you feel this particular subject of energy playing a role in creating rural jobs, why it's so important.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ananth, and thank you for having me on this panel. By the way, it's actually Social Entrepreneurship Day, I found out, so it's great. It's very timely that we have this panel, although all the entrepreneurs are social entrepreneurs. Maybe a little bit about Doen. We've been active in the energy access space for over a decade. We started off with, I guess, more of a view on households, but then moved more and more to where the innovation is. And that's also definitely in productive use. For us, access to energy is very important, not necessarily only from the environmental impact lens, which is, of course, very important, but also from a social impact, where we see access to energy as an enabler, or like you said, really as a catalyst, right? Because if you have access to energy, so much more becomes possible. And where it is a hindrance to not have it, if you have it, so many opportunities can come your way, right? So I think if you talk about rural jobs, energy is important also, one, because it can create a lot of jobs in the delivery of this energy. For instance, if you talk about a mini grid, it can create jobs in kind of the delivery of this energy, in installment, in maintenance, in collecting. And of course, these people need to be in the rural areas as well, where they are. So that's one, but it's also in last mile distribution, where we've seen actually from some of our partners where energy can actually create lots of micro entrepreneurs in sales agents or in whatever system they work. So that's very encouraging. But I think Yeah, I wouldn't say it's more important, but definitely equally important. It brings so much opportunity to all these micro entrepreneurs. On the one hand, it could, yeah, I'm now hesitant to use the word livelihoods, but help build livelihoods, create more economic opportunities. Say if you have a roti rolling machine, right? There are so many more rotis now you can actually sell to the market and create a market. So on the one hand, it benefits the entrepreneur that's already selling these rotis, but it could also become an example for others in the rural areas where they see that this actually can become a livelihood or a line of business where they can be more active. So we think that's important for that as well. We do have to say we're encouraged by the fact that more and more funders are active in this productive use area. Because of course, when more capital flows in, you create actually more of the soil, which Madan says as well, right? Because you also need this kind of ecosystem for these productive use entrepreneurs. So that's important, but it's also important that more and more intermediaries help grow this sector as well. But one of the last kind of points that is very important, at least for us, is the fact that if we want to reach SDG 7, so sustainable energy for all, that we can only do this if we grow the number of local entrepreneurs actually working in this field, because otherwise it's just never happening. So I think for that, it's very important too. And I think if you see what's happening now, we're slowly building this virtuous cycle where we create more opportunities because there is more access to energy, which makes sure that there are more local entrepreneurs, and then hopefully we grow over time. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Saskia. That's a really interesting point of view. I wanted to bring in Abhishek, but first let me make sure that he can hear us. Abhishek, I know you're having some network issues. Are you
Yes, I can. I definitely can.
Fantastic. Abhishek, so you've been listening to the discussion so far, and I think two major points. Madan spoke about the need to to create, not just create jobs, but to create micro entrepreneurs, who in turn can spawn more jobs. Saskia spoke about how energy can create that opportunity, that virtuous cycle where more and more people can enter into productive opportunities in rural areas. Now, interestingly, your organization, your company Greenwear, has actually embraced these two concepts very closely, right? I mean, from the start, you have always said that you want to be completely run on renewable energy. And secondly, you've also said that you want all your production to be decentralized. That is not in a factory setting, but rather in, made in clusters wherever the artisans, wherever the workers are available. So maybe I think if you can just tell us a little bit about the concept of Greenwear, a little bit about your journey so far, what and what you've what you've achieved, how your operations are. I think that would be very interesting for the audience.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity, first of all. And the story goes back in the later days of 2014 and earlier days of 2015. And it actually started from Sabarmati Ashram, Ahmedabad. And, it's very interesting to quote here that Madan sir was present there. It was a cohort of global action against poverty. And as he said, I actually got to listen to those students speaking in English and, building up that kind of confidence. So I actually witnessed that what he spoke earlier. There, we realized that the concept of khadi, localized abundance and circular economy, this concept was pretty amazing.
We seem to have lost Abhishek. Okay, Abhishek, you want to check your connection? Okay, I guess he's been having network problems right since the beginning. So what we'll do, as we wait for Abhishek to rejoin, he was just beginning his very interesting story about Greenwear, but maybe we'll get back into the discussion, and as soon as he's able to rejoin us, maybe we will ask him to speak again. But maybe back to you, Samik, and you kind of opened your conversation with a very kind of a good summary of what's happening today. But at the same time, I think World Bank, your organization, and you yourself have been at the forefront of kind of devising strategies to uplift the rural economy, to increase jobs, both through livelihoods and through entrepreneurship. And I guess particularly in this COVID time, what the work you do is very relevant. So I'd like you to reflect back, more not so much on the problem domain, but on the solution domain, right? What have you seen over the years that has worked well? What are the interventions that have worked well? What more probably could be done, especially in times like these, to kind of revive rural jobs and improve the a lot of micro entrepreneurs in rural areas?
Thanks, Ananth. I think that question is a question which all panelists should ponder on, and this is a question that we all are trying to kind of navigate through and try to think every day, every morning. But I think we must capitalize on this opportunity now to improve efficiencies, re-engineer existing market models, explore newer ones, look at cyclical economy more closely, so that you are rebuilding in a way and working with smaller localized models that can come up, like what Madan and Abhishek was starting to speak about. I think that's a very important solution frame we need to look at in terms of how do we localize our whole production system, localize our own job creations around local economies and local area development, and at the same time look at opportunity to link them to the global economy and all that. But focusing on this localized aspect is a very, very important and very, I would say, very viable means of looking at things at this point of time. I would say, given the restrictions, given that we are in a cocoon now to think through some of these new innovations we can bring around in localized space. So I think that's a very critical area where we need to really focus on and bring our mind together. We did some things. Let me throw some examples that has come out during this COVID period, which has worked well. For instance, I work with a project in Tamil Nadu, which is called the Tamil Nadu Rural Transformation Project. And the project was basically working around building micro enterprises and supporting the ecosystem development approach towards entrepreneurship development, basically. And when the COVID came and the lockdown happened, we immediately worked on something called a COVID assistance package. The whole perspective about the COVID assistance package was to restart enterprises that may not reopen or open at smaller scale due to the lack of capital because of the COVID lockdown, and also to the idea of bringing incomes and employment back to pre-lockdown levels, and reduce job loss, both formal, informal, and avoid distressed sale of assets. So, and when we started the program, we kind of started finding out that most of the beneficiaries or most of the entrepreneurs who are coming to take advantage of the COVID assistance package or nano, or 90% of them were like nano enterprises, which are very small enterprises, and then few micro enterprises in the rural areas. And they're facing crisis owing to reduced economic activities, changed business scenario because of the pandemic. The idea was to provide short-term 6-month stimulus towards protecting the business and enterprises, and to boost the local economy through increasing demand and maintaining some level of economic transaction at the micro level. The idea was the exchange of cash should not stop at the local level. So we pushed in around 300 crores, around 25 million, $30 million to the economy in around 104 blocks of Tamil Nadu. We are doing an impact evaluation. We need to see what happens to that. The other story which has been reported very largely about is the business correspondents or the BC Sakhis or the bank Sakhis, what do you say? I think that's another area where the household had access to cash for the savings as well as for the direct benefit transfers. The Sakhis earn a regular income through bank commission. I think that is a space in the financial inclusion domain, or the servicing the last mile clients, where the BC Sakhis have played a role, is one area where we can look at how we can make it more vibrant and make that a good business model, and create more jobs around that. The entire e-commerce area, which is vastly being exploited today because of the restrictions and movements and social distancing approach. So the government has set up the GEM portal also, through which they are doing the institutional buyers, rural enterprise uploading their products there, that kind of thing. So, and I think this is where we can also look at what other things can happen with the e-commerce kind of ecosystem, and how we can work around localized e-commerce platforms to reconnect and come together to service the larger markets around. The other area which I think came out of some experience with Kudumshri in Kerala was the care industry, where demonstrated a model to provide home-based health checkups and other basic diagnostic through trained women entrepreneurs. The women are provided a loan to buy a two-wheeler and are supported by trained health professionals. And such models can be looked at as we move forward in terms of how do we look after solution frames. Then the other area where I think we can really look at that, as you know, big businesses have access to consultant services, advisory services, and they can be very easily, they have more means of surviving this rather than the small and the micro entrepreneurs. So how do we bring in more collaborations, more private sector solution to micro enterprises on the revival path? So I think we need to think of how do we bring that, and how can the private sector play a role in bringing technology development, business development services, market trends on new products, and all that could be brought into the enterprise domain in the rural space, and more particularly in the macro space. So overall, if you look at also, we need to look at agri-entrepreneurship in a different way and look at value chain financing, value chain related infrastructure kind of approach of what can be done, as Madan was saying, with people who are going back to agriculture. There is the entrepreneurial spirit which is there. They've come back from the urban places and they're trying to help to do something more innovative, and they are in that space to be more entrepreneurial. So what could be done around some agri-based kind of models? One more thing which we are struggling also in one of our project is, Ananth, tell me when my time is over. I can go on and on.
Maybe one more example, Samik, and then Abhishek is back, so we'll also give him a chance.
Okay, so one more thing we are trying to do in Tamil Nadu is to see that we have invested in this 100,000 nano entrepreneurs whom we have supported through this COVID assistance package. So can we convert 10,000 from there into micro and create some jobs in the rural space? So we are putting through a process, and how do we really target or find out or fish out this 10,000 and invest on them in a very, very focused manner is what we are working towards. I think I would look to people like Abhishek and all of in this panel to help us think through how we do that from 1,000, from 100,000 to 10,000, and then each 10,000 with an average job of five jobs. So that is the kind of approach we want to go into. I'll stop here, and if anything comes during the conversation, I will take forward. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Samik. Abhishek, you're back with us, right?
Yes. I'm so sorry. There was, I don't know what happened.
No, that's understandable. Maybe you can avoid coming on video because that seems to be creating problem, but we're happy to hear your voice. So why don't you continue? You were talking about, how you got inspired to create Greenwear and the Khadi ecosystem that you observed. So please continue.
Right. So in Khadi, the real problem was actually not skill, but scale and speed. And it was then we realized that, if it can be coupled with renewable energy resources, machines can be powered by solar energy or solar and wind hybrid energy, there will be less drudgery and the productivity will increase. So the livelihood will also increase for a rural who cannot move out of her household for earning on a regular basis in a general scenario. So that's when we saw solar charkha was being presented, together by IIT Delhi and MGiri Werther guys. And then we thought that why don't we disseminate it as a pilot project? We started in a district of Bihar, Nevada, and this was a village, Khanwa. There were 1,200 households, and we trained 1,180 women. So, apart from only 20 households, you can say almost 100% participation were there. And those women started spinning yarn on solar charkhas, earning from 6,000 to 10,000 rupees. Later on, when the product is, since it cannot be called as khadi by definition, by constitution, and the charkhas had motors, we realized that there need to have a forward link, that they need to have a form for this. And then Greenwear was formed. When the job where was to assure that the 100% productivity which is coming out of these women, these solar charkhas are bought back, and then there are a lot of value addition techniques like weaving on solar looms, and then establishing a common facility center from where converted into a garment, and then it goes to different showrooms or even export purposes. So in order to do that, we also realize that these producers are also a very good consumers. And we realize that if we have such, if we observe that, what do they wear? What is their consumption capacity? How much do they actually, care of? So we realized that in our survey that, almost all of our productivity can be consumed by the local entrepreneurs, local producers. Where the real picture came into. The confidence which arised there, the value, and then the dependency upon power resources was less. So they were dependent upon from that sources also, where we could fuse the tradition and technology. So while having huge respect for traditional textile clusters and traditions, if you infuse a technology into tradition, we can work on. During the time of COVID, during the hardship of COVID, when had any work after 12-14 days, we got employment in UP and got this huge order of making fabric masks, and it became, we started with one block, one district, and then it went on to eight districts UP. And there we realized that if we have a common facility center, like if we have a stitching in a rural area, or wherever the yarn is being made or wherever the fabric are being woven, then the amount of traveling of these products will be less, and we could actually control the costing. But our only concern was where to find the skilled manpower, because usually these are concentrated on special economic zones or wherever the exports are based. But the reverse migration worked wonder. When a lot of people coming back to their villages from these clusters of Surat, Ludhiana, and they started connecting with us. They started telling us about their own experience, work upon this, they can make upon this. So our entire production facility was acted during this lockdown period, taking the expertise of such kind of people and help. So we have 40 odd such kind of tailors, master tailors, who can become in their own villages. And that's what we are aspiring for. That once our project will, there will be these tailors working in their community, establishing with and creating a common facility center there. So how an entrepreneur, how a micro entrepreneur is creating multiple micro entrepreneurs, this during this period, during the hardships of lockdown.
Thank you, Abhishek. That was a very nice summary of the journey so far. I'll just maybe take up one point and maybe address it to Madan. Madan, Abhishek was talking about how he aspires that each of his, those master tailors who are right now doing maybe an individual job, they can in turn employ, they can become micro entrepreneurs and they can employ several people, maybe each with their own machine, and they can become small, localized production centers. Now, if you put yourself, and since you have a lot of familiarity with the micro entrepreneurship scenario I'm asking you, if you put yourself in the shoes of that master tailor who now aspires to, grow his or her business, what is the kind of support available today in terms of infrastructure, and what are the gaps in that, both financing and infrastructure, which need to be addressed? Maybe if you can throw some light on that.
Absolutely, Ananth. And just to reflect back on the comments made by Samik, I wholeheartedly agree, saying that, COVID has actually given a lot of tailwinds. I think there are terrific tailwinds to the rural economy from COVID, right? Everybody is talking about distributed supply chains rather than centralized ones. People are talking about digital far more, especially for penetration for rural, and talking about creating a local infrastructure. Right. So I'm taking, you can't build an Atmanirbhar Bharat without building Atmanirbhar Gaon. Right. So I think that self-reliant communities flows back to, it's not a new thought, right from the time of Gandhiji's perspective of building self-reliant villages, where the village becomes a unit of economic activity and a social community. Has been there, and more recently eloquently articulated by Ilaben Bhatt in a book on Anuban, where she talks about 100-mile communities where food, clothing, housing, education, health, and basic trade are all available within 100-mile communities. So if you take it in that context and go back to, if I was a master trainer, in our experience, going back to the seed, soil, and climate, there are 3 things that are required. One is that it all begins here with the thought that how do you seed the thought in the master trainer to aspire to grow bigger, right? What local stories can we say? What kind of inspiration can we create? How do we celebrate, right? Why should Economic Times at a national level celebrate only some of India's greatest entrepreneurs? Why can't every block and every district have its own awards for entrepreneurs who braved odds and have grown? And I'm sure we'll find enough and more success stories in every nook and corner of the country, right? So how do we inspire people to think larger and go beyond? I think it all begins there. The second thing is that, okay, fine, I've been inspired. Now I aspire to grow larger. What help do I need? And in our various surveys that we've done, we found that I wouldn't even call it mentoring, but peer networks make a lot of difference. Especially for women entrepreneurship, they've said that, listen, the more I connect with other women doing stuff and we start to discuss what's happening, we can actually grow better, right? So I began my life as a part of TIE Bangalore. TIE is a global organization of entrepreneurs, and I was a part of TIE Bangalore maybe when we were 30 or 50 people. And I've really seen the ecosystem grow, right? So I imagine that how can there be entrepreneur clubs and networks in every village, every taluk, every district, which can support entrepreneurs? Somebody falls down, can 5 people go to him and say, don't worry, this happens to me, you can get up and run, right? And the larger part of how can you get the local bank manager, the local insurance agent, the local NABARD representative, SIDBI representative, all of them to root for the entrepreneur from their own perspectives, right? How do we create more success stories and create the soil? The last part is, so if I was that master trainer, how do I know 5 other master trainers who are on that same journey? Whom can I go and speak to? Can the local bank manager lend a shoulder to me to say, you know what, you don't worry, I'm here to support you, right? And lastly, at an ease of doing business side, not just from obstacles, but Abhishek spoke about creating common facilities centers. Can we create infrastructure where somebody can be incubated? Why should there be only tech incubators? Can there be an incubators for weavers? Can there be an incubator for home chefs? Can there be an incubator for grocery stores? Right? How can we increase productivity and efficiency of that asset being created on the ground? The last point, which is an interesting question that was asked, and I just want to link it to here, is that the question was that if we have to create jobs at scale, won't that imply fundamental innovations and new business models? Absolutely, right? I don't think we can solve the problems at the same levels at which we are created, and I think there is an opportunity to disrupt some of these models, right? Especially from a financing funding standpoint. Why can't this master weaver get VC funded? Now, what kind of venture capitalists can we create? What kind of grant, what kind of money can flow into enabling 100 such entrepreneurs in every district? So I think these are questions that we need to ask ourselves and reimagine the way we look at things. And there's a great opportunity. It goes back to the fundamental point that how can you inspire a lot more master weavers like the example you're talking about, to be able to conceptualize themselves as creating opportunities for 50 more people than just fending for themselves. And how do we make that the norm rather than the exception?
Thank you so much, Madan. Really very interesting thoughts and very, triggers a lot of, ideas from what you said. Maybe I'll go to Saskia, to ask and also link to one of the questions which I saw in the Q&A box. We already spoke about the fact that, this COVID provides opportunities, and Madan said it provides tailwinds to kind of push certain, kinds of recovery forward, which may be overall healthy for the planet, right? So taking this theme forward, I'd like you to probably explore two themes, Saskia, both, in your personal capacity and as a representative of one of the major philanthropies which can influence these things, right? So one is a green recovery. I think, we already saw how, say, Rockefeller has put in a big amount, I think $1 billion to support a green recovery. So how do you see, what would you kind of define as green recovery as being? And secondly, there's a question somebody has asked as, what is circular economy and how is it relevant? Is circular economy, only applicable to, say, the urbanites and the big factories, or even in a rural economy, in rural jobs? Is circular economy, does it have any meaning? And Doen has been a very strong supporter of circular economy. So these two concepts, green recovery and circular economy, as applicable to rural jobs, if you can throw some light from your perspective.
Sure, yeah, thank you. On the green recovery, I do think it's promising that, not just philanthropists, but also governments and so many players are talking about this. Yeah, either they call it building back better, green recovery, the big reset, etc. So that there's more momentum for that, right? Because as Doen, we've always been focused on systemic change. And I guess, for systemic change, for transitions to actually get there, it takes a while. And to get to a tipping point, sometimes you need this moment of chaos. And I guess this pandemic can definitely be this moment of chaos, and hopefully we can revive better from it, right? So I do see a lot of potential. But obviously it's important that it's not a lot of talk and a lot of hope, but actually a lot of action that comes from it, right? So I think philanthropy has a big role there. But I do think it's not just saying, okay, we have these great programs, let's, take them out into the world. But I actually think we as this sector, the philanthropic sector, can learn a lot from this crisis as well, because we've adapted our processes. For instance, we've become more flexible, even more flexible, looking at really what's needed on a local level, working need-based, working faster as well, because all of a sudden it seems that whoever is funding, we can have processes of a couple of weeks instead of months, and sometimes even much longer. So I do think if we want to build on this momentum and actually make change happen faster, that we should actually learn from this and kind of change how we're working as well. And I don't know, Samik, if you wanted to add something or?
Yes, just on the circular economy after you are done, maybe just one point that is coming to my mind.
So hopeful on the green recovery and on the circular economy, because I saw the question popping up. I do think for us, it's really, I wouldn't say part of this green recovery, but more what we kind of called some years ago, this new economy where we should move to. That whatever we do should be circular, whatever we produce, however we work. And I saw the question on the definition of circular economy. Basically, it's a closed loop. Whatever we do, make sure there's no waste, and we incorporate whatever we do in the cycle again. So how we design, there's no waste. How we sell, etc. Organizations take back. But also, for instance, in agriculture, it's actually using the waste that you have, again, maybe as fertilizer, or just being very smart about your resources. So because of that, I definitely don't think this is only for the urban areas, but actually all over the globe, this is important. And this is, I guess, for the, well, there are two cycles, I guess, in the circular economy, more a man-made one and a natural one. So for instance, what we think is very important in agriculture as well is that you do that in a circular way. So in a regenerative way, farming in a regenerative way, for instance. So I do see this as part of this green recovery, and all over urban areas and rural areas as well.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Saskia, for that. Maybe, sorry, Samik, you wanted to say something about circular economy.
No, just quickly, I think the entire, for me, the way I look at circular economy is very much related to our consumption behavior. I think that's the point we need to make very clear in this circular economy kind of thing. If the consumption behavior of us doesn't change to the way we want to consume things, the circular economy will be a utopian theory again for us. So I think we need to focus on working on consumption behavioral changes as we move forward to push on circular economy. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Samik. Abhishek, maybe I'll just bring you back in. You told us, about your story and how you created, and a nice optimistic picture about how multiple rural jobs can be created. But again, taking a reality check as on today, the COVID crisis obviously has hit everyone, and particularly for an organization like yours, which is in the textile space, right? I think one of the earlier speakers pointed out that today, the wedding season, which would have been a major kind of a boost for any textile company, it's virtually non-existent. I mean, these weddings have become very low-key affairs, very less spending. The discretionary cash available in the hands of people is very small. So how are you as an organization taking these these shocks? And what are the rays of hope or the green shoots that you see that will help you to revive your own business and in turn the livelihoods of multiple people who are dependent on your social enterprise?
Right. It's true that businesses have affected diversely. I would like to quote the silver lining here, that people became more sensitive to organic clothing, eco-friendly clothing, and a fashion which is sustainable. People did not know earlier that the textile industry is world's second largest, and more than 5% of all landfill space is consumed by textile waste. But now that is one. Second is, if we talk about the most adverse effect at the level, by giving you an example of the cluster of Varanasi. We all know that Varanasi is Banarsi brocade, it's silk, it's zari work through the master hand. But earlier, nobody cared about where the silk is coming from. The 90% of the consumption, 90% of the raw material used to come from China. And when the value chain got broken because of the lockdown and because of other decisions between India and China, they don't have raw materials, they don't have work. Rightly quoted that circular economy is directly connected with consumption behavior. The consumption was there, but they did not know that they need to have a production units in Varanasi. Varanasi is known for its silk product, but the raw material does not. So there is an opportunity. If entrepreneurs can come up, if in fact Weavers Group can come up, that they want to spin their own yarn, they want to reel their own silk, there is a huge opportunity. And luckily the weather is also pretty productive as far as cocoon culture. But this was not happening because there was no need. The supply chain was so robust, so strong, economical of the polyester silk yarn, artificial yarn, art silk. So these are the possibilities, these are the changes which we are seeing because of this post-COVID era. That yes, the businesses have gone down. Yeah, there are, but people have become more sensitive through their buying decisions. The wedding season and the effect on wedding seasons has concerned, have been receiving lots of inquiries for wedding gowns, wedding products. If we compare our orders from the last year, it has not gone down. are sourcing, maybe they are not going to big brands, maybe they are not going to markets, maybe they are not connected to designer labels, but organizations like us still getting pretty much good amount of inquiries in that sense as well.
Thank you, Abhishek. I think you brought a very, very critical point, and maybe it's a good way to kind of summarize this part of the discussion before we move on to taking some of the Q&A which are people have raised. But I think what you brought out was that the pandemic has changed the thinking of people in multiple ways, and I think the other speakers also brought that out. Right today, people who never really cared where that silk came from or where the clothing came, maybe during the pandemic for a few months that whole supply chain was disrupted because and then they suddenly realized that the only way to get was from a nearby source, and suddenly all of a sudden that awareness has come that, oh well, it's important that I know where this item is coming from, and maybe there is a certain pride attached to the fact that it is coming from a nearby district and by artisans who are employed in the same state or something like that. So that whole awareness of the origin of these goods, awareness about how it is prepared, I think that is coming. Similarly, I think as one of the other panelists brought out, and I think Madan very eloquently put it, the whole concept of Atmanirbhar, and Saskia, for your benefit, Atmanirbhar means self-sufficient, and it's a kind of logo or slogan which our government, especially our Prime Minister, has embraced. He wants India to be Atmanirbhar or self-sufficient. But as Madan pointed out, you cannot have Atmanirbhar India without having an Atmanirbhar Gaon or village. And that I think a lot of the artisans and a lot of the micro entrepreneurs have also realized that in an emergency situation, if they don't have a localized source of energy or power, that whole concept is going to go for a is not going to work, and therefore the need to have more self-reliance on especially energy sources, I think that also we have observed has been a big revelation and a big awareness creation during this whole pandemic. But I think the discussion has been very interesting so far, but it's really time to bring in the audience, and let me as the moderator do that. I will run through the Q&A box and maybe pick a few of the questions. I'm really sorry that we may not be able to handle all of them, but I will pick as many as we can, and I will try to kind of route them to the most appropriate person. Maybe I think let me start with maybe from the bottom. So there's a question about a gentleman, Mr. Subhashish Sahu, who's working with farmers, and his foundation is connected to a lot of farmers. Maybe this is to Samik. He's asking about what best agri models can be implemented for a great impact for creating jobs. So maybe from your experience, any models, agri models, and here also I would like to point out that a lot of the speeches Prime Minister Modi has been talking about from farmers to farmer entrepreneurs. So have you seen this shift? Is it possible for farmers to become farmer entrepreneurs and in turn create a lot of jobs in the agri space?
I think this is definitely possible. I think when I spoke about a value chain approach to how do you dismantle the value chain and look at what levels you can create, what kind of processing, what kind of storing, what kind of cold chain related services. I think this can be totally decentralized and as distributed into different localized area to do this. I think we need to really understand, because the way the value chain is understood today is from where you stand on the value chain. So the more you stand on the downside of the value chain, you will understand the number of opportunity that is there in the value chain to create job opportunity. So for example, if we are working with mango growers in a certain cluster in Odisha, for example, and you are collecting mango. So what are you doing in terms of creating mango storages instead of selling it quickly because you don't have storage spaces? So what are you doing about it? So I think those kind of new technologies has to be brought in there. New infrastructure funds have to be brought in there, and it is not just that it's a public element there. It's more of a private element. How the private player comes in, work with what is available from various schemes that the government has, and make sure that there is a solution frame which is actually bringing more self-life to mangoes in that particular location. So I think it is definitely possible, but it has to be very, very in a nuanced way looked at and understood basically. And that idea that you get in to do something has to be nurtured and supported. I think what is happening, that I should go to the extent of saying the 3-4 words that has been very loosely used in our community of practice is about innovation, incubation, and also this value chain financing and all that, which I also use, I admit that. But I think these are very, very big things there, which we need to really understand when we talk about. I'm just taking a question which I think some Ajar has also asked me, what is World Bank take on stabilizing right to access of basic needs? But I think in a rural space, why the poor has to be poorly serviced? Why the rural entrepreneur has to be poorly serviced? They have a right to be good service. Public investment have to go in there to create that ecosystem for a level playing field for people living in any space, basically rural or urban. So I am of the opinion that we need, it's not just about financing, funding, but we need to bring in this policy aspects into our discussions to ensure that all these aspects are taken care of when we are trying to build entrepreneurship. It's not an easy deal. Madan is doing it for years. I have been trying it for years and years, and the element of complexities are so much. But still we have to be there finding out solutions. I think we are trying to do some things. We are trying to graduate into certain complex situations to solve them. But let's see where we go with that. But there are solutions, and I think we would be able to do a lot of things on ground, basically.
Thank you, Samik. I'll take another question which came up just now in the question box. It's from Vasant. Vasant happens to be one of the entrepreneurs who supported under our Powering Livelihoods program. And this is to Madan. And I think it's a very pertinent question for all the social entrepreneurs who are working on solutions which are meant for the rural economy, right? The question of how do you actually get that solution deep into a rural heartland where somebody can use it, that whole supply chain, the rural supply chain. How do you, the question to be very precise is, how do you see the rural supply chain improving? And, how do you improve that quality of delivery to the last mile? And that's really something which will catalyze the growth of these social enterprises, which can then create livelihoods. So Madan, you've been involved in the rural supply chain. Maybe you can, give us some insight into that.
Sorry, Ananth. Very aptly to this conversation, we had a power outage as you were asking me that question. I assume that you're asking me that. we need solar powered Wi-Fi's at least, routers.
Right.
Yeah. No, I saw the question on the last mile piece, and I go back to what Samik was saying, that the poor or the villages in the country pay far higher for services than what we pay in the cities. And why should they be there, that inequity, right? Rural last mile has been the bugbear for a lot of organizations in the past, be it for the last mile or the first mile. And I believe that by bringing in much more technology, right? How do you optimize routes? How do you bring down the cost of transportation? We talked about bringing electric vehicles and using EVs for the last mile so that it brings down the cost of transportation, right? Which is another big opportunity. And third is, how do we, and that's what we are trying to do at OneBridge, how do you use this scores of Kirana stores that are looking for opportunities, and can you make them delivery points? And that's the line that we are trying to set up now, that you create a network of operators, use technology to connect them and make sure that the packages don't fall between the cracks. And can you use EVs to bring down the costs of transportation, so that the pipe you're bringing into the village optimizes the cost for everybody. This is what we're trying to solve for. We operate in about 65 districts. We have over about 1,500 people working on the last mile. And we've been able to do some lots of optimization of the cost, still nowhere close to what we need to be. But I believe that as we open up the pipe more and more, the cost will come down. The unit economics will start playing out. And I think that's the critical one to think about for the last mile, that how do you aggregate demand at a village level or supply and create one common pipe that can carry all of this in and out.
Sure. Thank you. And maybe I'll just quickly, and if you can, answer this, in brief, there's a question on how a common person can get involved in revitalizing livelihoods. And I thought, Madan, again, because of your experience with things like GAME, where you actually do involve all, and other organizations that you're part of, where a lot of volunteerism happens. Is there a way for the common person, somebody who's doing something else, but just with an interest to contribute towards improving or revitalizing rural livelihood? Is there a way for that such a person to get involved in this mission?
The question is absolutely. I think it takes more than a village to create a self-reliant village, in a way that, see, the point is that I'll give you an example. And, Abhishek alluded to this. We ran something called as Global Action on Poverty, where we partnered with Sabarmati Ashram and several other organizations to work with change makers. And it was interesting. We had over about 1,000 social enterprises that worked with us, NGOs, and we have over about 300, 400 life coaches, people who volunteer the time with us. What we realize is that it is not any great technical expertise. It is not some deep domain expertise. When we used to have a life coach from Bangalore calling somebody in Bihar who's running a school for girls, and just picking up the phone and asking, how are you doing? Right? I hope things are okay. And can I be of any help? It used to make that entrepreneur, the social entrepreneur in Bihar, feel good, saying that somebody else in the world cares about me. Right? So the least I will ask for is, anybody interested, hey, will you be able to make 10 calls in a month, which is like 5-minute calls to entrepreneurs and saying, hey, can I understand more about your life? What problems are you facing? And can we start amplifying that? Imagine if 1,000 people were to call 5 people every month or 10 people every month, and we were to amplify 10,000 voices of entrepreneurs. And if there's 10,000 tweets go to the Ministry of MSME or to the PM, these 10,000 tweets will not be ignored. Right? So I think there's a collective power that we can leverage to listen to voices, to amplify at the least. And then it can be scaled up in terms of, I think the example that Samik, you were talking about, why should only the larger corporations have the McKinseys of the world? Can we create an army of consultants who can help a vegetable vendor figure out how to grow their business 3x? Can they help a farmer to figure out what are the 3 things you must do to improve your business? And of course, we can use a lot of tech to build that. So I think if the intent is there, there are enough and more of options available, and look forward to working with anybody and everybody who wants to make a difference.
Sure. There's a question in the question Q&A box about how a social entrepreneurship in its ideation stage can get into a prominent incubation program and get seed funding. Maybe I will take that as a representative of Villgro, which has been doing this for 20 years. So see, what I would advise, it's the further you are on the entrepreneurship journey, the more your chances of getting incubated and getting funded. What I mean by this is, if you are at a very early idea stage, right? A lot of people have ideas, but I think the bigger challenge is to put that idea into action, to show your commitment to live with that idea, to run with it, to face all the ups and downs. So any incubator, if I were to put myself in the shoes of someone who's selecting companies for incubation, and obviously that's a limited number because of various reasons, it would be a company or an entrepreneur who that he or she can walk that from mile with the idea and convert it into action. So while no doubt there are programs which are available for ideation stage entrepreneurs, I think they are few and far between. But if you're able to somehow raise a little bit of at least your own seed funding or your own self-funding, take the idea to a stage where at least there is some kind of a visible, tangible product or service, and more importantly, a few customers have actually expressed interest, willingness to pay for it. I think that is something any incubator would look out for, because that's a stage from where incubation becomes most effective. Taking it from that kind of a viable product where there is some level of limited customer traction to a stage where it is scaled up, to a stage where then the enterprise can just launch off, commercial capital can come in, banks become interested. I think that is the sweet spot for an incubator. So my advice to everyone is take it a little beyond the idea stage, get it to a stage where at least there is something tangible to show some customer interest. Then any incubator would be very interested in taking it further. I think we are pretty much out of time. We are at 5:45, which is where we wanted to end this session. So I think we, with a big round of thanks to all the participants who came today. Samik for making the time. Saskia, you came across time zones to join us. We are really honored to have you. Madan, you gave us some really good insights based on all your experience. And, again, thank you very much for joining us. Abhishek, as an entrepreneur, I know, I can imagine how busy you are, and you, in spite of that, you came and, participated. A big thanks to all of you. I believe that from the level of interaction we've seen on the Q&A box and the chat box, the audience was very engaged. On behalf of the audience, I thank all of the speakers. Look forward to more such sessions where we can get together and brainstorm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ananth, for a lovely moderation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you,
Saskia.
everyone.
See you